What's up, everybody? My name is Aga, and today on the show we have a very special guest, Rob Fitzpatrick, somebody I admire and I followed for a while, and he'll teach us how to talk to customers to validate your idea when everybody's lying to you. So, welcome, Rob.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Rob, you have a few businesses behind you. I read on your book that you basically said that you've been driving businesses out of business since 2007. So tell us a bit more, how did it all started?
I fell into startups accidentally. I was a programmer, and no one had ever told me that startups were an option. They're like, "Oh, you're a programmer. You can work for this company or that company." And once I learned they existed, I thought, this is amazing. So I was getting a PhD at the time. I pitched my research to Y Combinator. We went in for the interview, and Paul Graham said, "No, this is a terrible idea. It'll never work. It'll never scale. But we love your team. So if you come up with an idea that doesn't suck in the next 10 minutes, we'll fund that." So we had a quick brainstorming session, and by the end of the meeting, he's like, "Good, that'll be it." And it showed me kind of the value of having good co-founders, and it's why I made so many mistakes, I think, in the first company, because it's like we chose it kind of randomly. We chose the business on the spot, and we ended up building advertising technology, which really wasn't a great fit for our team. But we ran it for about 4 years. We raised a couple rounds of funding, and then after that, once we failed, I was trying to understand why that had happened, and that's where I got really into the education, and I kind of fell in love with startups.
Wow. So how that's really interesting, because you obviously raised the funding and then the company failed eventually anyway. What do you think were the reasons?
There were a lot. Probably the biggest one. Well, we were built on top of Facebook and Twitter, and when you do that, it's good, but it's dangerous. And they ended up not being very helpful for us because they wanted the advertising market themselves. Obviously, that makes sense. And we would have found it out a lot sooner and probably found a way around it if I had been better at sales. But the founding team, like, I was a video game designer and a programmer. My co-founders were a programmer, an industrial designer, and a classically trained fine artist. None of us had any business sense. Like, we'd never been to a meeting before. If you combined our whole team, no one had been, it was crazy. And
Wow.
so we were getting all these amazing introductions. Like, we had one week where I got phone calls from Disney, from EMI, from Warner, from Sony, from MTV, and they were all like, "Hey, we saw your product. Can we buy it? Can we license it?" And I managed to screw up all those calls. It's because sales really is, it's one of these things you have to learn. It's fun, it's simple once you get it, but it's like it takes a bit of learning. So I missed a lot of opportunities because of that. And then the economy crashing made it a lot harder to raise more money. But it was all normal stuff. It's like we just missed it, right?
4 years is a long time, isn't it, though?
Yeah.
How did you get to the Y incubator?
Um, well, like, we loved it. That was kind of our education in startups. So we chose the idea during the interview, then we started working. We went through, it was very exciting. At demo day, our business just wasn't far enough along for us to be able to raise funding. So we were in there with Dropbox, with Songkick, with Discuss, really good companies that were raising money immediately. And we weren't able to. We're saying, like, why can't we do this? And so we gave up. We gave up on fundraising, and we went back to focusing on the business. And we had our product. We got a couple lucky sales. I think we did maybe $100,000 in revenue over maybe 6 or 9 months. And then when we went back to investors, we just ran into one at a party. He's like, "Hey, blah, blah, blah." And we're like, "Oh, this is our company." He goes, "Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I'll definitely invest in that." And so it's like, it wasn't that our pitch wasn't good enough. It's just that we hadn't spent enough time building the company. So as soon as we built the company, then, funding comes easy.
Mm. Wow, that's interesting. Were you living in the US at that time? Yeah.
Yeah, and we actually moved to London for that funding round because it was a European investor. Because Europe has London has a much better advertising market than the Valley does. Everyone fantasizes about the Valley because it has all the investors, but ultimately you need to be near your customers, right?
Yeah. So did you, at that stage, did you do any customer interviews, or was it more, going with the gut? I guess also when you gain so so much positive feedback, you kind of, assume that it's just gonna go and go well, yeah?
Yeah, our issue was that we had a first product, which, like I said, like total, it probably did maybe 250,000 in revenue. So it did some revenue, and we had big clients. We had MTV, Sony, Aardman Animation, JBL, Roxy, like cool brands, and they were using it globally. But it wasn't a scalable product. Like each customer would only pay us so much money, and it took a long time to sell to them. So we knew, and it wasn't recurring either. It was one-time revenue. So once we got Sony's money, we could never get more of it. So it was really hard to grow that business. So we knew we needed to switch to a different product. And that was when we started doing a ton of customer development. The first one happened basically by accident. We made something we thought was fun and people wanted to buy it. And then the second product, we're like, okay, we're going to figure this out. So yeah, for months and months, maybe years, all I was doing was talking to people full time. And I realized I was really messing it up. Like I would go into a meeting. I don't know if you've ever done this. I would go into a meeting and they go, "Hey, show me what you've got." I go, "Oh, well, here's my product. It does this and this. It has all these features. It has these benefits. It's so great." They go, "Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you so much." And then I would leave and I'd be like, "Did they like it? I don't even know. Like, are we building the right product? What do we need to change?" I wasn't actually getting feedback that let me build a better business. And so it took a while, and that's the stuff I put into the book. It's like, how do you go into these conversations and actually learn instead of just selling?
Yeah. What happened after? So basically, how did you just decided that the company is not a go, or you're not able to build a scalable model? How did it end up?
It ended, I think. Everyone says you shouldn't go into debt for a startup. You got to protect yourself. You got to protect, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really hard to do the first time. Like now it's easy. If I see a project that's like, you can you get away from it. But that first one, we had employees, we had our investors. And so I didn't quit until like basically everyone on the founding team was bankrupt because we all kept putting our money into the company saying, oh, we'll make one more month's payroll. We'll do one more month. It's going to turn around. And it was just we were so beat down. We were all broke. We had no way to continue. We're like, there was maybe 20 grand left in the company accounts. And so we took that and we took the last chunk of money and just maintained the servers for another year so that our existing clients would have time to, recover. But that was it. I mean, now I'm much earlier. Like if I don't really like something in the first couple months, it's, I'm just like, I'm out of here.
How did it feel, to get to that point?
It was bad, but it felt. I've seen this with a lot of founders. It's really, really painful when your company's failing, and then as soon as you decide and you're like, "Okay, I'm out," it feels great because you're like, "Oh, thank goodness!" Like you can suddenly see it as soon as you're outside, and you go, "At least this is how it was for me." I was like, "Oh, we did all these cool things. I learned so much," and yeah, it was nice. But yeah, it was really hard at the time.
What was so, there's lots of people saying how that how do you find the right time to quit, in terms of knowing, not driving yourself to the finish line basically, but let's say pivoting too early or dropping it too early. When is this point when you think that you should go away from this idea or drop this idea?
I mean, I don't know an answer. I think it's really a personal question. For me, as long as you're still excited about it. If you're excited, you can keep working. And it depends as well. Like, I don't like to raise money that early anymore. With the last one, we went into Y Combinator immediately. Then we raised money straight afterwards or as soon as we could. And that makes it really hard to quit. If it's just you and a co-founder, and one day you wake up and you go, actually, this isn't that fun anymore, it's easy to walk away. No one depends on you. So I try to keep the company small for as long as possible to keep that freedom. I don't know. I mean, I did this thing. I think it's common. You have a big company or like one that you run for a long time. You're like, wow, we really overcommitted to that. And then I spent a while, maybe 3 months, just trying to make a different project every week. And I had the opposite problem there because a week just isn't enough time to make something succeed. In a week, in a week you can say, here's a website, but you can't actually. Growth takes time. Figuring out what people care about takes time. So now I kind of decide in advance, okay, I'm going to spend 3 months on this, and I just do the best I can, and then I reevaluate. But you need enough time to make a real decision.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened after you left the company?
So I was broke, and I didn't want to get a job. So I took the last bit of like the deposit that I got back from my flat, and I used it to rent. I used the deposit to rent a warehouse in Shoreditch in London, and I turned it into a co-working space, office space, because I thought that it's recurring monthly revenue. I know lots of startups. It's a way to meet more startups, which I want to do. And if I could fill the office space, then I would have enough money to live, and I would have to stay there because I would have to run the office. And I turned half of it into my flat and the other half into the workspace. So I would
That's
have
awesome.
to, you say that. I would have to be there all day, but it wouldn't actually take much time. So it meant that I paid my bills with this little warehouse, and on all of my free time I could use to learn and to, try to build the next project.
That sounds like such a good idea to start off with, and build more connection, be around the startups, and just have this environment. That's
Yeah.
really cool. And then at some point you did the 10K challenge. Was that after that? After
Yeah.
you basically got it going?
Yeah. So I got the warehouse going, and then I left it after about just under a year because it just wasn't good. I wanted to live in a real flat,
Mm.
normal things. And so I helped a US startup expand into the UK. And I did that for about 6 months. And I didn't like working for another company, and I wanted to do my own. So I took all the money that I'd earned from doing that expansion. And the idea was I would just spend it and try to work on goofy little ideas, see if I could make something work. And it didn't. But I learned a lot. I made about 6 different projects. One of them turned into my next startup. Um, but I guess what I learned is that if money is an issue, so I just chose whatever I chose whichever ideas seemed fun. But if money is an issue, if you need to generate revenue, then you can't just choose whichever idea you want. There's certain types of startup ideas which earn money quickly, and there's others which don't.
Mhm.
And if you've only got like 3 months or 6 months of runway, you got to choose an idea that can make money fast. Um, but I had a load of fun. I worked on a bunch of stuff. Again, I met people. It was good.
What are the idea which are making money fast and which are not, like from your learning?
So some that are good, like subscription software aimed at small businesses or professionals or freelancers, is good. That's what 37 Signals and Amy Hoy and all those guys recommend. Um, Marketplaces where you're selling something high value and you can take a cut. So if you're connecting, like recruiting is like this, you connect people to jobs and you take a percentage. Or if you connect like vacations, or like I did it for public speakers, where if you were looking for a public speaker at an event, you could like do the connection through us, and it was good. They generate money really quickly. Whereas something like I tried ideas, I built an online thing to help you come up with ideas to blog about, and it like
Yeah.
kind of was viral and it kind of was interesting and people like it. They still tweet about it and talk about it and stuff, but there was no way to make fast money. So like that was a terrible idea given the circumstances I was in.
Right, and then the Dexio came out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, Dexio was a quick throwaway idea, and I just fell in love with it. So I was like, one more week, one more week, one more week. And after about 6 weeks, I decided, I just want to focus on this. So, and the original idea, well, it changed a bit, but the one that did okay was this connecting speakers with conferences. And why we liked it is that it was really, really easy to test. So the first day we had the idea, we emailed like 100 speakers and we said, hey, I'm going to find you speaking gigs. Is that cool? And they all said, yeah, that's amazing. We said, okay, fill out this Google Doc, fill out this form, give us all your information. So now we had 100 speakers. And then we emailed this is within a day, we emailed 12 conference organizers. And we said like, hey, think of me as your personal assistant. If you need a speaker, tell me and I'll find them for you. and you'll pay me £20 for each speaker I introduce you to. And by the end of the day, we'd made like £1,040, I think. And so it was like, fine. We're like, hey, there's, the pricing works. The people will pay for this. And then now we just need to try to figure out how to grow it.
Right. What happened next? Like, what stage are you at with it?
So we demoted it to a project. And the reason is that one of the nice things about not raising VC money and hiring employees is that you can goof around. And I was goofing around doing education stuff. I was talking at universities. I was helping out at accelerators, and I really liked it. And I'd been doing it casually for a couple years. And I actually set this up. This is what allowed me to work on Dexio, because I burned through all the Bootstrap Challenge money, and then Dexio it generated some cash, but not enough. And so I'd set up another business a while earlier around the teaching, and I tried to make it take as little time as possible. So I got it down to 6 hours a week, and that basically covered all of the expenses for the two of us who were on the team. So it took like 3 hours a week per person, and it was great. And it was ticking along. It was paying the bills. It was a good little business. I was working on Dexio, and it just kept growing. Not Dexio, the other one. And I was looking at it, and I'm like, man, I'm struggling with Dexio and Dexio is generating like a little revenue. And I'm trying to figure out how do I grow this? How do I take it to the next stage? And like accidentally, this business I'm ignoring is doing really well. So I looked at them both, and I decided to switch my focus back to the education stuff. And I'm actually having a blast with it. It's really fun. I've never run this type of business before, and I'm enjoying it.
What does it involve? Is it speaking, or do you do courses?
Yeah,
you can tell our audience a bit more.
We do a little of that. It's called Founder-centric, and there are some courses. The book I wrote is under that. But the main thing is when universities or accelerators or corporations want to like teach entrepreneurship, we help them design their education programs. And so there's a bunch of ways that happens. But basically, it's a service business that we're now figuring out how do you productize it, how do you scale it. It's really fun. Everyone talks bad about service businesses. They say, "Oh, it's service, it sucks," but it's so fun. You do stuff, people pay you. There's profit. You figure out what you want to do with it to take it to the next level, and it's interesting.
And I guess if that's something you love doing, and you're real learning, that you can have a lot of fun with it. Definitely.
Yeah, that's good. And so now tech products are like my side projects. I just reversed it. So my tech product now is called Hey Look a Book, which generates like web pages for authors to sell your book on.
Wow.
And that I like. But I do that in my spare time, and now the main business is education, and the side businesses are tech.
Wow. So would you say that for everybody who's kind of trying their ways in entrepreneurship, would you say that you have to try a few different things to work out what you want to do?
That doesn't seem to be true for everyone. Like some guys nail it their first time, but for me, it was definitely the case. It took a lot of, like, now I know, there, you just get a feel. You're like, oh, I like this type of company. And yeah, I mean, I've been, 7, 8 years now. I've been doing startups full time. So there's been a lot of different experiences, and then, yeah, it helps. Side projects are great too, though. They don't have to be built to make money. Like just the experience of having a blog and trying to grow it, you're going to learn a lot about whether you like marketing and community-led businesses, So they don't all have to be like super serious.
Yeah, I agree. Would you recommend doing the challenges? I love the idea of the 10K challenge. Would you recommend it as a good way to, try yourself and put yourself under pressure to actually do something? What was your experience?
Yeah, it was pretty fun. I mean, it depends. Like, it depends a little bit. I think the most important thing if you're starting out is you got to figure out how to make money just for yourself. Like, if you can be a freelancer, then you can be really silly with the types of startup ideas you go after. Because you're like, oh, if it doesn't work, I'll just go back to freelancing.
Yeah.
If you need someone to like give you a job and it's hard to find jobs in your industry, then it gets a lot scarier to fail a startup, because you're like, oh, what am I going to do? Will I be able to pay rent? So especially like if you're in university and you're like, you want to do startups in the future, I think just figuring out how to make money yourself, however, it's a really useful skill. I think that comes first. And then if I was going to do the Bootstrap Challenge again, the way I would do it is I would copy strong business models that I know work. So I would do a subscription software for freelancers and charge them $30 a month. That's what Amy Hoy recommends. I
Mm.
would do information products with a funnel that's like you give a free product into a cheap paid product into an expensive paid, and there's these series, and that's very cheap to create. It's like instant.
Yeah.
I, and so I think you can strain it a bit more. You look at what's working and you go, okay, I'm just going to do these things rather than like do anything.
Yeah, I just recently read your blog post about the about choose yeah, how you choose the business ideas, um and I was that was talking about that you start with the model, what resources you have, I think, what assets, yeah, but you kind of go reverse, which was really interesting. You don't try to come up with business idea, but you try to like come up with a framework, what you would and what have, what would
Mm.
make a good idea. And I really like that. That was really interesting because lots of people are like, oh, let's build something, or they want to be entrepreneurs, but they don't really think like what would work for them,
Yeah.
what they would enjoy.
Yeah. The biggest one, I think, is whether it's a sales business or a marketing business,
Mm,
whether it's going to consumers, going to enterprises, those ones are really big. But there's a whole body of like theory about this called effectuation. And they found that a lot of the most successful entrepreneurs don't actually choose a random vision and figure out how to get there. Instead, they look at the connections and the resources they already have, and they go, okay, how could I combine these things? What could I do with them? Like they look for partnerships, they look for joint ventures, they look for it's. So I think it's a little more reliable, but I don't know how you get to $1 billion business like that.
I like that approach. I think it's a great approach to actually choose the business idea. And I tried services businesses, and I know it's not for me. I struggled so much, and it made me depressed, and it made me miserable. So so yeah, it's definitely there are different types of businesses which would fit your personality or your goals or what you want to achieve in life, basically. So that's interesting. Awesome. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing all that stories. So let's talk a bit more about your latest book and the customer development. Tell us. So the book is basically called the Mom Test, and it's based on all your experiences you had with the businesses. Why Mom Test?
Because people say you're not meant to ask your mom whether your business is a good idea. Because your mom loves everything you do, and she'll say, "Yeah, it's wonderful. You're very smart. It's going to be successful. Good job." And so that's not useful feedback. If someone always gives you compliments, there's no data there. And I found that that was actually true when you talk to anyone. You go to an investor and you go, "Hey, here's my business," and they go, "Oh, that's really interesting. Keep me in the loop. Let me know how it goes. Like, keep me up to date." And so you're always hearing these compliments, and they're not actually helping you build a better business. And so I decided to like flip that on its head and say, it's not that you can't ask your mom whether your business is a good idea. You shouldn't ask anyone if your business is a good idea. And instead, you ask them about their lives and what they care about, their goals, their budgets, their problems, and then you come to your own decision.
Yeah. I said the whole idea is basically it's based on the lean startup and the customer development framework from Steve Blank. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember I was working in a healthcare startup, and I was basically, that was the first time I got my 4 steps to epiphany, and that became my a big book I was carrying around and reading and following, and we actually built the startup with this book. But the problem was, I remember going to interviews and having my questions written down, and going like, hey, can I interview you? And having a very formal interview, and I would check boxes and try to gather data. And yet, very often the answers, as you're saying, they weren't useful. You give a lot of examples like what makes good and bad questions. Could you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, so I have like you have your idea. It's help people grow vegetables somewhere, help them grow their own veggies. And so if you come and you go, "Hey, I'm going to help people grow their own vegetables," I'm going to go, "Wow, that's really cool. That's the world needs that. That's great." If you go, "Hey, Rob, do you have a garden?" And I go, "No, I don't." And you go, "Why not?" And I go, "Well, I mean, I have a big terrace. I've got a big patio. I guess I could have a garden. I don't know. It's like I never like I don't know where to start. What do I go carry a bunch of soil up the stairs? So you're like, well, have you looked around? Have you looked into what you could plant? And I'm like, yeah, I did actually. I bought a book of like plants that you can grow in pots. And you're sort of like, why pots? Like, and I'm like, well, suddenly you're learning all these things about
Yeah.
what I care about, how I like see the problem. And then you're like, okay, Rob actually is interested in growing plants, but he's a bit overwhelmed. He's like, he doesn't have much time. He doesn't want to have to choose. He like has never been able to keep a plant alive. You can be like, okay, I think he needs this type of product. And then you can come back to me and you can say, hey, like, I know what your situation is. I think you need this. Like, do you want to commit to it? Will you buy it? Will you recommend it? And those are kind of the two stages. Figure out what I care about and then give me something to commit to or reject.
Wow, that's cool. So what would be the examples of the questions I shouldn't be asking?
Do you think this is a good idea? How much would you pay me for this? Do you like this?
Right.
Do you think you would ever want to grow vegetables yourself? Anything about the future is I'm probably going to lie to you. You go, hey, do you think you would buy this thing which lets you plant vegetables on your terrace? And go, yeah, definitely. But then, okay, I need to like carry it up the stairs, and how does it get shipped to me? Do I have to? There's all these questions, and I'm optimistic. You go, hey, do you want to be healthier? I'm like, yeah, definitely. But do I join a gym? Like, no. So you don't want to talk about the future. You don't want to ask people's opinions. Do you like this? What do you think? Like, don't ask me. Don't ask me what I would pay for it in the future. You go like, how much are you already spending on vegetables? I'm like, oh well, how much? Whatever. You go, okay, I could save you money. You're figuring out what I'm already spending, not what I think I would spend.
Right, I see. I just see how I screwed up all of my recent conversations. That's a good learning. You talk in your way, so we have these bad questions, these good questions, but very often people just, if you're in the networking or anywhere else, people just ask you, what do you do? What's your idea? And then you get into obviously the pitching mode, yeah. And then
Yeah.
you're just screwed from there because there's no way, they're biased already. There's no way you can, like, I find it very hard to recover from it because the next 5 minutes of the conversation is about my idea and I'm not really learning. How on earth do you, how do you recover from it? How can you fix that?
Well, startup networking events are pretty useless for learning anyway because they're not your customers. But let's say it's easier if you think, let's say you're just at a friend's party, and you're talking to someone and you're like, hey, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you live in Barcelona. Like, do you have a terrace? Do you have a garden? Do you have plants? Like, suddenly, and they're like, yeah. And you're just talking, you know? It's not an interview. It's not that structured. You talk. And so I try to get away from the situations where people expect me to pitch.
Mm.
I try to avoid having meetings. I try to avoid going to like startup networking events or whatever,